Good morning, fifth graders. I am going to talk to you about the area of triangles. Yesterday, you looked at the area of parallelograms, which I don't think was very complicated because you've done area of quadrilaterals for a long time. The only difference here is that we know a parallelogram kind of sits off center because it doesn't have 90-degree angles. And so because it sits when it doesn't have 90-degree angles, this side measurement isn't our true measurement that you would use for the length or the width measurement, okay? So it gives us a height to tell us exactly how tall that figure is, and then you multiply the base times the height, and that's what you did on workbook page 125 yesterday. So all you had to do was take your two numbers and multiply them just like you would for length times width. So if you're having trouble with that, just look at your instructions again at the top of page 125. It's just the exact same as finding area of any other quadrilateral. It's called base times height now instead of length times width because of those angles that are not true 90-degree angles. You have to have the height to be able to multiply. So the same way as you did the area for parallelograms, we're going to shift and talk about the area of triangles. And the area of triangles is interesting. It still uses those same measurements of base times height. Okay, so just like the parallelograms, we're still going to be multiplying two dimensions, the base and the height. And remember, when you multiply a dimension times a dimension, your answer is going to be in square units. And I'll show you what that's going to look like for your answer, and you can make sure you did that on your parallelogram page also. So the interesting thing about triangles is that triangles are part of quadrilaterals. And we talked about this before when we talked about quadrilaterals and triangles earlier in the year with our actual geometry unit instead of just with measurement. So if I draw a rectangle that looks like this, and I hope you can see my orange pen. If I draw a rectangle that looks like that, and then I draw a diagonal line from one corner to the next, I've created two triangles, okay? So when you find the area of a triangle, you're still going to be multiplying two dimensions, like length times width, or in this case, we're going to call it base times height. You're still going to be multiplying base times height, but now, since a triangle is half a parallelogram, the actual formula for finding the area of a triangle is to multiply the base times the height and calculate that times a half. Cut it in half, just like in your picture here. You have a quadrilateral that you've cut in half, and then you have your triangle. So it's like finding the base times height of any quadrilateral and then cutting it in half. Now, multiplying a fraction times these numbers is a little bit unnecessary where you'd have to set everything up as a fraction and multiply it. So the same thing as multiplying by half is dividing something in two, cutting it in half. So we're actually going to say you're going to do the base times the height, just like you've done for every other area measurement that you've done, base times height, then get your answer and divide that answer by 2. Same thing as finding a half of it, divide it by 2, okay? So I have written down number 1 from workbook page 126 on the front. Okay, so number 1 has a triangle, and it has the triangle with a vertical line straight down from the top that shows you the height of the triangle, okay? And then you have a measurement along the bottom that tells you the base of the triangle. And those words really tell us what part of the triangle we're talking about. The base is the bottom, and the height is that vertical line. You just have to use those two numbers, the base and the height, to calculate to find the area of a triangle, okay? And then remember, a triangle is half of a quadrilateral, so once we get the answer of base times height, we're going to cut it in half, okay? So base times height and then divide by 2. So here's number 1 from page 126. The base is 7 inches. The height is 4 inches. All you have to do is multiply those two numbers. So base times height, 7 times 4, you get the answer 28. That would be the actual area of the parallelogram or the quadrilateral. So you're going to take that 28 now and cut it in half, so divide it by 2. And 28 divided by 2 gives you 14 inches. And all area measurements have to have square units. That's because you multiplied a dimension times a dimension, and you have a 2D figure now. You're telling how much space it has in between, in the inside of its area, okay? So make sure that you do the base times the height and divide by 2, okay? I'm going to do number 2 with you also. It has decimal numbers, and I don't want us to be scared by decimal numbers. If you really need to use a calculator, it's okay, just for the sake of time, because people who are working in contracting professions or professions where they have to do this kind of measurement, they're probably using calculators if they have them available. But you can do 2.2 times 5.4. So I'm going to do that and show you just as a refresher for multiplying decimals, okay? So this is number 2 on the front of page 126. So our formula is half times base times height. I'm going to do base times height, and then how do you cut it in half? You divide by 2. So here's the formula we're starting out with. This is the rule for area of a triangle. Base times height divided by 2. If you look at the figure in number 2, the base is 5.4 and the height is 2.2. So we're going to start with that point. Just do the base times the height. So let's talk about how to multiply decimals. Okay? You're going to set the problem up and stack it. 5.4 times 2 2/10. And multiply just like you regularly would. Just ignore the decimals at this point, okay? So, 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 5 is 10. I carry my 0 down here, placeholder 0, because we're done with this 10th place here. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times 5 is 10 again, okay? Now I'm going to find the sum. Okay, so I've got 4 digits here because I had 4 digits that I was multiplying up here at the top. When you need to put your decimal in your answer, when you multiply it, you have to count how many numbers are behind the decimal in the problem. There's 1 here, and there's 1 here. So 2 numbers behind the decimal in the problem, so 2 numbers behind the decimal in the answer. So base times height gives us the answer 11 88/100ths, okay? Now, that's the base times the height. What do we have to do next? We have to split this in half, okay? So we're going to do 11 88/100ths divided by 2. There's another scary problem with a decimal in it, but you know that when you divide decimals, you can really ignore the decimal until you're all done, okay? So I'm going to put that just as long division. And really what you have to do with the decimal here is kind of ignore it in the problem and just throw it up on the bar, if you remember that, okay? So how many times will 2 go into 11? 5 times. That gives us 10 with a difference of 1 and bring down the 8 here. How many times does 2 go into 18? That would be 9. 9 times 2 is 18. We get a difference of 0 and then bring down that final 8. And 2 goes into 8 4 times. Okay, so you could do that in a calculator, but just as quickly to do it here, 5 49/100ths would be your answer. Okay? Now, just to shift gears a little bit, I'm going to skip number 3 and go down to number 4. Number 4 gives you the area already. You're not finding the area here. They gave you the area. You have to figure out what the height is. Okay? So, keep this in mind. Area, they tell us, equals 16 inches square. And we know what the base is. The base equals 8. So we kind of have to work backwards here and think, okay, what times 8 equals 16? And that's easy enough. What times 8 equals 16? 8 times 2 equals 16. And that would be our 16 inches square. Okay? So far we think that 2 is the height. So 8 times 2 is 16. But what is the rule for the area of triangles? The rule for area of triangles is that you have to divide the base times the height divided by 2. So we have to adjust a little bit, and I want you to think about what you would do to adjust for having that answer being half of what it should be. So it's not really multiplied by 2 that we did here. Remember, this number was cut in half, so we have to consider that this number used to be 4. Multiply it by 2 now instead of dividing by 2, okay? So the height for number 4 would be 4 inches, because 8 times 4 would give you 32, and 32 divided in half would give you 16. So we just doubled this dimension here because 16 was cut in half, okay? Alrighty, so work on that. I'll put the answers up tomorrow afternoon so you can check it when you get finished with it. If you have any questions, let me know, and just do your best. Use that formula that you know, base times height for the triangle, and then divide it by 2, okay? All right, have a good afternoon. See you later.